There were 42 paper cups on a folding table, and I counted every single one of them, while my daughter-in-law told our neighbors that I would be moving out within the month. I was holding a bag of ice at the time. 7 pounds. The kind you buy at the gas station for $2.50, sweating through the plastic and onto my wrist. I remember the cold. I remember the sound of Tyler's friends screaming somewhere near the trampoline. And I remember Vanessa's voice, bright and hostess warm, carrying just far enough for the people near the drink table to hear it clearly. "It's not like this was ever really his house to begin with," she said, smiling the whole time, like she was talking about the weather. "He gave it to Daniel years ago. It's time he let it go. For real this time." Nobody looked at me. That was the part that stayed. Not the words. The way 11 adults, standing within 12 feet of me, all found something urgent to study on the ground. I set the ice down on the table, so my hands would have something to do besides shake. 30 days, she'd said a moment before, like she was reading off a lease agreement. 30 days to find somewhere else to be. My own grandson's 8th birthday party, and I was being served an eviction notice between the hot dogs and the cake. I had absolutely no idea, standing there in that August heat, with cold water running down my forearm, that in 6 weeks I would be the one holding all the paperwork. Neither did she. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 64 years old, and for 31 of those years I made my living the way a lot of men in Cherokee County, Georgia, have made theirs, with a tool belt, a truck, and a willingness to climb into attics in July, when the temperature under the insulation reads 130 degrees and nobody in the house upstairs has any idea what that heat costs a man's knees over 3 decades. I ran Briggs Electrical out of a single truck starting in 1991, back when Canton was still mostly farmland and the drive into Atlanta took less than half the time it does now. I wired new construction. I rewired old farmhouses whose fuse boxes hadn't been touched since Eisenhower. I did panel upgrades for families who couldn't run a window unit and a coffee maker at the same time without tripping a breaker. And I never once, in 31 years, missed a service call because I didn't feel like driving out in the rain. My hands will tell you everything you need to know about the life I built. The first 2 fingers on my right hand don't fully straighten anymore. There's a scar along my left forearm from 2003, a hot wire and a moment of carelessness I never repeated. My knees announce themselves on the stairs every morning, a soft popping sound like knuckles cracking, and I have made my peace with the fact that they will never again do what they did at 30. I remember one call in particular, out on Bell's Ferry Road in the summer of 1994, a farmhouse owned by a widow named Ruth Calloway, who was down to her last breaker before the whole house went dark. It was 101 degrees that afternoon, according to the thermometer bolted to her porch post, and I spent 4 hours in an attic where the air felt closer to 140, sweat running into my eyes so steadily I had to stop every 20 minutes just to wipe my face with a rag I kept looped through my belt. When I came down that ladder, Mrs. Calloway handed me a glass of sweet tea with so much condensation running down the side it had left a ring on her kitchen table, and she said, "Son, I don't know how you people do this work." And I remember thinking, even at 29 years old with my knees already starting to complain, that there was a particular kind of pride in being the person who could walk into somebody's darkness and hand them their light back before dinner. That feeling never left me. Not in 31 years. Not through 1,000 attics after that one. It is, I think, part of why the idea of being discarded by my own family cut as deep as it did. A man spends 3 decades being the person other people call when something in their life has gone dark. And it is a strange, disorienting thing to become, in your own household, the thing somebody else wants to be rid of. I built the house myself, not with a crew standing over my shoulder telling me where studs went. I mean, I framed it, wired it, and finished it with my own 2 hands over 18 months in 1997 and 1998, on 4 acres of land off Hickory Flat Highway that I bought outright with money I'd saved since I was 19 years old working for another man's electrical outfit and promising myself I would never again build somebody else's dream on somebody else's schedule. Linda and I moved in on a Tuesday in March. I remember the date because it was the day after her 30th birthday, and I remember the smell of fresh paint and sawdust still hanging in the hallway, and I remember she stood in the empty kitchen with her hand flat against the wall like she was checking whether it was real. Linda was the reason any of it mattered. We met in 1985 at a laundromat in Marietta, of all places, when her dryer ate 2 quarters and mine had one to spare. We were married 18 months later. She worked as a school nurse for 26 years at Creekview Elementary, and she had a way of making every single child who walked into her office feel like the most important person she'd see that day. Even the 5th time that week, the same 9-year-old faked a stomachache to avoid a math test. We tried for children for the better part of a decade before Daniel came along in 1990, and I have never told a soul how many nights Linda cried in that laundromat bathroom before he finally did. Linda died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't leave much time once it does. For months from diagnosis to the morning I woke up next to her, and the house was quieter than I had ever heard it. I am not going to spend long on this part of the story, because it is not really what this story is about, but I want you to understand something before I go any further. When you build a house with your own hands, and you fill it with 30 years of somebody's laugh, and then that somebody is gone, the house does not become smaller. It becomes enormous. Every room is a room she is not in. I used to walk past the guest bathroom and still expect to smell her hair dryer. I remember the exact time the hospice nurse woke me on the last morning, 4:51. According to the clock radio Linda had kept on her side of the bed since 1994, the kind with the red numbers that glow too bright in the dark. I remember the smell of the room, antiseptic and lavender lotion mixed together in a way I have never been able to separate since. I remember that the house, afterward, made sounds it had never made before. The refrigerator cycling on, the pipes ticking as they cooled, ordinary sounds that had always been there underneath 30 years of her moving through the rooms, sounds I had simply never had reason to notice until there was nothing else left to hear over them. Daniel flew in from a business trip in Charlotte the next morning and stood in that kitchen with me for a long time without either of us saying much of anything, and I remember thinking, even in the middle of losing my wife, how grateful I was that at least the two of us still had each other to stand in a quiet kitchen with. That gratitude matters to this story, because it is the reason what happened 3 years later cut as deep as it did. When you have already learned, once, what it costs to lose the person a house was built around, you do not take lightly the idea of losing the house itself, or of watching the people left inside it treat what remains of it like a line item on a spreadsheet. That is part of why, 8 years ago, I built a suite above the garage. I told myself it was for guests, for Linda's sister when she visited from Ohio, for Daniel if he and whoever he eventually married ever needed a soft place to land for a few months. It had its own entrance, its own small kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a sitting area with a window that looked out over the back pasture where I still, at that point, kept 2 horses that belonged more to memory than to any practical purpose. I wired it myself, obviously, ran the whole electrical panel separate from the main house, so it could stand alone if it ever needed to. I did not know, when I built it, that I was building my own future address. But 3 years after Linda passed, when the big house started feeling less like a home and more like a museum I lived inside of, I moved into the suite myself and let the silence of the main house belong to somebody who needed it more. That somebody was Daniel. My son lost his job in commercial insurance sales in the spring of 3 years ago, right around the same time his and Vanessa's apartment lease in Woodstock came up for renewal at a number that made his eyes go flat when he told me about it over the phone. He did not ask me for help. Daniel has never once in his life directly asked me for anything, which I used to think was pride, and have since come to understand was something closer to fear. Fear of what it would mean about him if he had to. I offered before he could find a way not to ask. I told him the main house was sitting there with 4 bedrooms and nobody living a single day of life inside it, and that I had already moved into the suite, and that it made no sense for a house to stand empty while my son and his family scraped together first, last, and security on some overpriced 2-bedroom 40 minutes from where I lived. I told him it was temporary. I believed that when I said it. I want to be completely honest with you here, because this story does not work if I am not. I never signed a single piece of paper transferring that house to my son. Not once. What I did in the informal handshake, family shorthand way that men of my generation tend to communicate the largest promises of our lives was say something like, This'll be yours one day anyway, so you might as well be living in it now instead of paying some landlord in Woodstock. I meant it as a father's blessing. Vanessa, I would later learn, heard it as a closing statement on a real estate transaction. Vanessa came into Daniel's life about 7 years ago, and I want to be fair to her here, because fair is something I still believe in even after everything I am about to tell you. When Daniel first brought her around, she was, by every outward measure, exactly the kind of woman a father hopes his son finds. She had a marketing degree from Kennesaw State. She worked hard. She was polished in a way that made me a little self-conscious of my own rough edges. The kind of woman who noticed if you used the wrong fork and was gracious enough to pretend she hadn't. She called me Mr. Briggs for the first year, which I found old-fashioned and touching, and she brought a bottle of good bourbon to Thanksgiving even though she herself doesn't drink, because she'd asked around and found out it was what I liked. The first signal, and I want to be honest that I saw it and let it go, because that is what people do when they love someone and do not want to be the kind of person who keeps a ledger, came about a year into her and Daniel's marriage. We were standing in my kitchen, the one in the main house, and she ran her hand along the granite countertop I'd had installed the year before Linda got sick, and she said, almost to herself, "This countertop alone is worth what my parents' whole kitchen cost." She wasn't cruel about it. She said it the way you'd comment on the weather. But there was something in the way her eyes moved across the room after that. Cataloging is the only word I have for it. Square footage, land acreage, the value of things. I told myself I was being an old man who read too much into an offhand comment, and I let it go. The way you let go of 100 small things over the years, because holding on to every one of them would mean never enjoying a Thanksgiving again. The tone shifted slowly. Over the 3 years they lived in the main house, it shifted the way water shifts a riverbank. Not all at once. Nothing you'd point to and call a single event, just an inch here and an inch there, until one day the whole shape of the thing is different than it used to be. She started referring to the house as ours, in conversations with her own family, her sister, her friends from her book club. I heard about this secondhand from a neighbor, Carol Dennison, who mentioned in passing at the mailbox that Vanessa had told her they were thinking of redoing the primary bathroom, since it's ours now anyway. I did not correct Carol. I am not entirely sure why. I think some part of me did not want to be the kind of father who kept score against his own son's wife in front of the neighbors. There was a second signal, about 18 months in, that I have thought about more since than I did at the time. Vanessa asked me, over coffee on a Sunday morning, in a tone so casual it took me a full day to notice how carefully it had been rehearsed, whether I had ever thought about what happens to the house paperwork long-term, just for planning purposes. I told her the truth, which was that I hadn't given it much formal thought, that it would all sort itself out eventually, that there was no rush. She nodded, smiled, changed the subject to Tyler's soccer schedule, and I did not think about that conversation again for almost a year. Not until I was standing in that same kitchen reading messages on a tablet that made it clear exactly how much thought she herself had been giving it in the meantime. By the 3rd year, the proprietary tone had become something closer to habit than performance. She reorganized the pantry without asking. She had painters in to redo the hallway a color she liked better, a soft sage green over the warm cream Linda had chosen in 1998, and mentioned it to me only after the work was already done. The way you tell someone about a change you'd made to your own property, rather than someone else's. None of it on its own was a crime. All of it together was a woman quietly rehearsing ownership of something she had never been given. The explicit insult, the one that finally forced me to see clearly what I had been letting myself not see for 3 years, happened on a Saturday afternoon at exactly 4:40 in the afternoon, at Tyler's 8th birthday party, in my own backyard, in front of 11 adults and roughly a dozen children who were, thankfully, too busy with the trampoline to notice what was happening among the grown-ups. I told you the wound line already. It's not like this was ever really his house to begin with. He gave it to Daniel years ago. It's time he let it go. For real this time. What I did not tell you is what my son did while his wife said this. Daniel was standing 4 feet away from me, holding a paper plate with half a hot dog on it, and he looked down at that plate like it had suddenly become the most important object in the state of Georgia. He did not correct her. He did not say, "Actually, honey, That's not quite right." He did not so much as glance in my direction. My son, who I taught to ride a bike on that same patch of grass, who I sat beside in a hospital waiting room for 4 months while his mother died, said nothing at all, and let his wife tell our neighbors that I would be gone in 30 days. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that clearly, because I know what kind of moment this sounds like it should have been, and I know what a lot of men would have done standing in that yard with cold water running down their arm and their own grandson's birthday cake sitting uncut on the table 20 feet away. I did not do any of that. I picked the ice back up. I carried it to the cooler. I said something polite to Carol Dennison about her potato salad, and at 6:15 that evening, once the last car had pulled out of the driveway and the sun had dropped low enough to turn the pasture gold, I walked up the stairs to the suite above the garage, sat down at the small kitchen table Linda and I bought at an estate sale in 2004, and I let myself sit very still for a long time. I want to tell you what that felt like, because hurt is too small a word, and I have never trusted it anyway. My hands went cold. It was 91 degrees outside at 6:15 in the evening in the middle of a Georgia August, and my hands went cold like it was January. Everything in the room got very quiet, quieter than it should have been with the window open and the cicadas going full volume in the pasture. It was like somebody had reached over and turned the whole world's volume down to almost nothing, and all I could hear clearly was my own heartbeat and, underneath it, 31 years of a working man's certainty that he had done everything right, starting to come apart at the seams like a hem nobody had thought to reinforce. I did not confront anyone that night. I did not confront anyone the next morning either. What I did, at exactly 8 o'clock the following Monday, was walk down to the main house while Daniel was at work and Vanessa had taken Tyler to a dentist appointment, and I let myself in through the garage door with my own key, and I went looking, not for a fight, not yet, but for the truth of what I already suspected I would find. The tablet was sitting on the kitchen counter, charging, the way it always sat when Vanessa wasn't using it. I want to be honest that I had no plan to go through it. I was there, ostensibly, to check on a dripping faucet in the downstairs bathroom that Daniel had mentioned the week before. But the screen lit up when I set my coffee mug down beside it, a notification, the kind that shows a preview line without you having to unlock anything, and the name on it was a realtor's name I recognized from a sign 2 streets over. Sherry Talbot, Keller Williams, North Atlanta. The preview line read, "Once the old man is out, we can list by October. Easy $610,000 in this market." I am not proud of what I did next, and I have thought about it many times since, whether I had any right to it. But I picked up that tablet, and because Vanessa has used the same 4-digit code on every device she's owned since I've known her, Tyler's birthday, 0317, I opened it, and I read. The thread went back 4 months. 4 months of messages between Vanessa and a realtor about listing a house that was not hers to list, that had never once had her name or Daniel's name on a single piece of paper filed with Cherokee County. There were messages to her sister, too, that I found harder to read than the ones to the realtor, because those were the ones that told me what she actually thought of me rather than what she thought the house was worth. Daniel's too soft to just tell him. One read, from 6 weeks earlier. He keeps saying, not yet, like there's ever going to be a good time to put an old man in a home. Another, from 3 weeks before the birthday party. Found a place in Woodstock, $2,400 a month, assisted living, decent reviews. He'll hate it, but honestly, at some point this stops being about what he wants. And the one that stopped my breath in my chest, sent to her sister 2 days before the party. The one I would end up reading twice, then a third time, then setting the tablet down and picking it back up to read a 4th time, because some part of me needed it to say something different than it said. He's just deadweight at this point, Steph. Sweet old deadweight, but deadweight. This house could actually be worth something to us, instead of just being where he parks himself. Deadweight. My hands went cold reading it the same way they'd gone cold in the yard 2 days before, except this time there was something else underneath the cold, something with more shape to it, more weight of its own. The shape, I would come to realize over the following weeks, of a decision beginning to form. Something settled into my chest in that kitchen, standing over a tablet that wasn't mine, reading words that were never meant for me. It felt like furniture being moved into a room I hadn't asked to have furnished. Heavy, permanent, not going anywhere soon. I set the tablet back exactly where I found it, angled the same 3 degrees off the edge of the counter, plugged the charging cable back in at the same angle it had been. I fixed the dripping faucet, because I had come there to fix a faucet, and a man keeps his word about the things he says he'll do, even on a day like that one. And then I drove home. To the suite, I mean, which had become the whole of home, for me in a way I was only starting to understand. And I sat with what I now knew for a long, long time before I let myself do anything about it. The decision not to act immediately did not come from fear. I want to be clear about that. It came from 31 years of a trade that teaches you, if you're paying attention, that the worst thing you can do with a live wire is grab it before you know exactly where the current is running. You cut the power first. You test it twice. You do not touch anything until you are certain, because certainty is the only thing standing between you and getting badly hurt, and sometimes between you and hurting somebody else who doesn't deserve it. Daniel's name was on those messages too, in a way. Not as a co-conspirator exactly, but as an obstacle Vanessa was actively engineering around. My son was being managed, and some part of me, even furious, even standing in a kitchen that had been mine for 25 years, being called a deadweight problem by the woman my son had chosen to build a life with, still wanted to know the full shape of what I was dealing with before I did anything that could not be undone. I called Frank Delgado on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the birthday party, at exactly 10:15. Frank had been Linda's second cousin and my closest friend for the better part of 3 decades, ever since he did the closing on the 4 acres I bought back in 1996. He'd spent 38 years as a real estate and title attorney in Cherokee County before retiring 4 years ago. And if there was one man alive who could tell me with total certainty what I actually owned and what I did not, it was him. We met at the Waffle House off Riverstone Parkway, the same booth we'd been sitting in for coffee every couple of weeks since Linda's funeral. I told him everything. The party, the tablet, the messages, the word deadweight that I could not stop hearing in Vanessa's voice even though I had only ever read it in her handwriting. Frank listened the entire way through without interrupting once, which is a rare thing in a man who spent nearly 4 decades getting paid by the hour to talk. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup a slow half-circle on the table the way he does when he's thinking through something carefully. Then he said the thing I will remember for the rest of my life, the sentence that reframed everything I thought I understood about the last 3 years. "Walter," he said, "did you ever sign a warranty deed transferring that property to Daniel? Anything? A quitclaim? Anything at all filed with the county?" I told him no. I told him I'd always meant to someday, when things settled, when there was a good time for it. The way you tell yourself there will eventually be a good time to have the hard conversation you've been putting off for years. Frank set his coffee cup down and looked at me the way he used to look at clients who'd walked into his office thinking they were in one kind of trouble and were about to find out they were actually in a very different kind. "Then that house," he said, "every square foot of it, the land under it, the garage, the suite you're sitting in right now, all of it is still legally and entirely yours. There's no transaction. There's no transfer. There's a father who let his son live in his house, and a daughter-in-law who has spent 3 years telling herself and everyone else a story that was never true on paper, not for one single day." I asked him what that meant practically. He told me it meant I could, this afternoon if I wanted, walk into the Cherokee County Recorder of Deeds office and pull the current title, and it would say Walter James Briggs, and no one else. He told me it meant Sherry Talbot from Keller Williams could not legally list a house she had no listing agreement for from the actual owner, and that if she'd been working off Vanessa's representations without verifying title, which sounded, from what I described, entirely likely, that was a conversation Sherry's broker was going to want to have with her eventually, whether I chose to pursue it or not. And then Frank said the line I have thought about more times in the past 2 months than almost anything else in my life. He said, "People who talk about a house like it already belongs to them are usually telling you exactly how little they actually understand about what belonging means. Ownership on paper and ownership in someone's head are 2 completely different documents, Walter. Only one of them holds up in court. I did not go to the recorder's office that day out of anger. I went 2 days later, on a Thursday, at 10 in the morning, because I wanted to hold the paper in my own two hands before I decided what to do next. The clerk printed it for $4. I stood in the parking lot afterward and read my own name on a piece of paper that said, in plain government language, what 31 years of work had actually purchased, and what nobody. Not a daughter-in-law with a realtor on speed dial, not even. God forgive me for the thought. My own son, standing silent with a hot dog in his hand, had the power to take from me, without my say-so. The 6 weeks between that morning in the parking lot and what happened on the 12th of October were, on the surface, the most ordinary 6 weeks of my life. This is the part of the story that people who haven't lived through something like it never quite understand. You would think, holding what I was holding, that the days would feel dramatic, charged, cinematic somehow. They were the opposite. I made coffee every morning at 6:15, same as I had for 30 years. I drove into the main house twice a week to have dinner with Daniel, Vanessa, and Tyler, because I was not going to let a piece of paper change how I showed up for my grandson, and because a man does not tip his hand before he's ready to play it. I sat at that dinner table on a Wednesday in September and passed Vanessa the green beans and asked her how her sister Steph was doing. And she said, "Oh, she's good. Thanks for asking, Walter," and smiled at me in a way that I now understood, with total clarity, was the smile of a woman who believed she had 30 days and counting until a problem in her life quietly disappeared into an assisted living facility in Woodstock. I found that dinner harder to sit through than almost anything since Linda's funeral. Not because I was angry, though I was, underneath. In a low steady current I kept carefully grounded, but because some part of me kept looking at Tyler across the table, 8 years old, laughing at something on his tablet, completely unaware that the walls around him were about to shift in a way that had nothing to do with anything he had done. I have thought a great deal since about how much of what adults do to each other gets absorbed by the children, standing quietly in the middle of it, whether we mean for it to or not. There were other dinners like that one throughout September, 3 or 4 of them, and each time I found a different ordinary task to hide inside of. One Thursday I helped Vanessa carry groceries in from her car, 6 bags in 2 trips, and she thanked me the way you'd thank any helpful older relative, completely unaware that I had, 2 days earlier, read a message where she'd called me sweet old deadweight to her sister. I remember setting a bag of oranges down on that same granite countertop she'd once told me was worth more than her parents' whole kitchen, and thinking how strange it was that my hands could do something as simple and kind as carrying groceries, while the rest of me was quietly building a case 60 feet away, in a drawer above the garage. Another evening, I sat on the back porch with Daniel while he grilled chicken, and Vanessa came out to ask whether I thought the sage green paint in the hallway read too cold, and I told her, honestly, that I thought it looked nice, because it did, and because a man does not have to hate a person to know exactly what they've done to him. Both things were true at once. I have found since that most of life's hardest chapters ask you to hold 2 true things at the same time without letting either one cancel the other out. I spent those weeks assembling what Frank called, only half joking, the file. I made a certified copy of the deed. I pulled 6 years of property tax records, all of them paid from my own account, none of them from Daniel's or Vanessa's. I saved screenshots of the messages on the tablet. Frank walked me through, carefully, how to do this in a way that would hold up as evidence if it ever needed to, photographing each screen with a separate camera rather than trying to forward or copy the files directly, time-stamping each photograph, keeping a written log of exactly when and how each piece had been found. I want to be honest that this felt, at moments, like something closer to a criminal investigation than a family dispute, and there was a part of me that hated needing to do it at all. Frank and I met 3 more times over those 6 weeks, always at the same Waffle House booth, always over coffee. He insisted on paying for at least half the time, even though I kept trying to pick up the check. At the second of those meetings, he asked me a question that stopped me mid-sip. "Walter," he said, "what is it you actually want out of this? Not what you're owed, what you want." I told him I didn't know yet, and he told me that was fine, that most people don't know until the moment arrives, but that I should think about it before then, because a man who walks into a confrontation without knowing what he wants at the end of it usually ends up wanting whatever feels satisfying in the moment, and satisfying in the moment and right for the long run are not always the same thing. I thought about that question more than almost anything else Frank said to me that fall. By the time October came, I had an answer, even if it wasn't a comfortable one. I wanted the truth said out loud, in front of the people who mattered, and I wanted my grandson to still have two parents who loved him, even if they no longer loved each other under the same roof. At the safety deposit box at the Bank of North Georgia branch on Riverstone Parkway, I pulled the original 1996 land survey and the 1998 certificate of occupancy, both still smelling faintly of the metal box they'd sat in for over 2 decades. I remember standing at the little private table in the vault room at exactly 11:40 on a Wednesday morning, holding paper that predated my son's marriage by 6 years, thinking about how strange it was that a piece of paper that old could still matter more than anything said out loud in the 8 years since. By the last week of September, sitting at my kitchen table above the garage, with a folder Frank had given me, a plain brown accordion folder, nothing dramatic, I had every piece of paper I would need laid out in an order that told, without a single word of anger in it, the entire true story of who owned what, and who had known what, and when. I want to tell you about one evening in particular, because it is the one I keep coming back to. It was a Tuesday, the 29th of September, and I had gone to the main house to help Tyler with a science project, a volcano made of baking soda and vinegar, the kind every 8-year-old in America has built since the dawn of time. Vanessa was at a yoga class. Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table I'd bought at a furniture outlet in Marietta in 2001, while Tyler mixed his red food coloring into a plastic cup, and Daniel said, out of nowhere, not looking at me, "Dad, I know things have felt weird lately. I'm sorry about that." It was the closest my son had come, in 9 weeks, to acknowledging that anything had happened at all. He did not say Vanessa's name. He did not mention the party, or the 30 days, or any of it directly, but he said he was sorry, and he said it while looking at his own hands on the table rather than at me, and something in his voice. I want to be fair here, because fairness is the only thing I have left to offer a situation like this one. Sounded like a man who knew exactly how far he had let something go, and did not yet know how to stop it, and hated himself a little for both of those facts at once. I told him it was all right. I did not tell him about the folder sitting 11 feet away from us in a drawer beneath the counter, or the deed with only my name on it, or the messages that used the word deadweight to describe his father. I told him it was all right, and I helped Tyler pour vinegar into a volcano, and I drove home that night thinking about how complicated it is to love somebody who is being managed by someone else, and how much I still, underneath everything, wanted my son back. The 12th of October was a Saturday, and it was Tyler's rescheduled birthday party. The real one, the big one, the one Vanessa had been planning for 2 months, the one that was supposed to double, I would learn later, as the celebration where she'd casually mentioned to the extended family and half the neighborhood that they were starting fresh and finally making the house officially theirs. She had invited 40 people. She had rented a bounce house. She had ordered a cake from the good bakery in Woodstock instead of the grocery store one, the kind with fondant flowers that cost more than some people's monthly car payment. It was, in every way that mattered to her, exactly the kind of stage she liked to perform on. Her territory, her guest list, her carefully arranged version of a life she had built out of somebody else's foundation. I arrived at 2 in the afternoon, same as everyone else, and I brought Frank Delgado with me, introduced simply as an old friend of the family, which was not a lie, only an incomplete truth. Frank wore a golf shirt and khakis and looked, to anyone glancing at him, exactly like what he appeared to be, a pleasant older man there for cake and conversation. He carried a manila envelope under his arm the whole afternoon, the way another man might carry a camera, unremarkable, unremarked upon. I waited until 3:40, until most of the children had cake on their hands and most of the adults had a drink in theirs, until Vanessa stood up on the back porch steps with a small microphone speaker Bluetooth connected to her phone. She had actually rented a microphone for an 8-year-old's birthday party, which tells you something about the kind of afternoon she had planned, and began the announcement I had been waiting 9 weeks to hear. "Before we do cake," she said, smiling out at 40 people, "Daniel and I wanted to share some exciting news. We're doing some renovations around here, starting next month, and honestly, It feels like this house is really finally becoming ours. I stood up from the folding chair I'd been sitting in near the drink table, and I want you to know that my hands were not shaking. My voice, when it came, was the same voice I'd used to talk grown men off ladders in a lightning storm, level and unhurried. The voice a man uses when he already knows how the next 5 minutes are going to end. Before we get to that, I said, there's something everyone here has a right to see. Vanessa laughed, the bright hostess laugh she used when she wasn't sure yet whether something was a joke. Walter, we're about to do cake. This won't take long, I said, and I nodded to Frank, who stepped forward and opened the manila envelope on the picnic table in front of him, laying out 3 documents in a row where the nearest dozen guests could see them clearly if they wanted to. The certified deed, the tax records, a single printed page of screenshots that I had chosen very carefully. Not the cruelest ones, not the deadweight one, not yet. Just a message about listing the house for $610,000 once the old man is out. My name is Frank Delgado, Frank said, in the same calm voice he'd used for 38 years explaining closing documents to nervous first-time homebuyers. I'm a retired real estate attorney and a family friend, and Walter asked me to be here today because there's some confusion that's built up over the last few years about who actually owns this property, and I think it's kinder to everyone to clear that up plainly, once, in front of the people who've been told a different version. The yard went quiet in the particular way a crowd goes quiet when it senses, before it fully understands, that something real is happening. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed at something on the bounce house, and then stopped, sensing the shift in the adults around her the way children always do before they understand its cause. Vanessa's smile did not disappear all at once. It went first, the way expensive things sometimes do, cracking slowly along a seam nobody had noticed was there. Her mother, standing near the drink table, set down her plastic cup of lemonade with a small, precise click against the folding table, the kind of sound that carries further than it should in a silent yard. Steph, Vanessa's sister, took a half-step forward and then stopped herself, glancing between her sister and the papers on the picnic table like she was trying to decide which direction the ground was actually falling. This is Walter's property, Frank continued, tapping the deed with one finger. Recorded, filed, current as of 2 weeks ago. No transfer has ever been executed to Daniel or to Vanessa. Not a deed. Not a quitclaim. Nothing on file with Cherokee County shows anything other than sole ownership by Walter James Briggs. That's, Vanessa started, and I watched her face move through the first stage exactly the way Frank had told me, weeks earlier at the Waffle House, that it probably would. That's not. There's some kind of misunderstanding. That paperwork must be old. We've been planning to formalize things. This is. The deed is current, Frank said, not unkindly. I pulled it myself 2 days ago, and Walter pulled a certified copy from the recorder's office 3 weeks before that. There's no misunderstanding on the county's end. There may be one on someone else's. That was the pivot. I watched it happen almost in real time, the way you'd watch someone recalculate a route on a GPS after missing a turn. Vanessa's chin lifted. Her voice found its composure again, quicker than I expected, and I gave her credit, in that moment, for a kind of resilience I had underestimated. Well, she said, glancing around at the guests now watching with the particular fascinated stillness of people at a party who have stumbled into somebody else's crisis. Even so, Walter, you know we've taken care of this place for 3 years. We've put money into it. Daniel's put sweat into it. Surely there's room to talk about. There is, I said. There's always room to talk. But not by telling 40 of our neighbors that this house is finally yours, when you've known for 3 years it was never anything but mine to give. And not after telling your sister I'm deadweight you're managing your husband around. I had not planned to say that last part out loud. I want to be honest about that. It came out of me the way water comes through a crack you didn't know was there until the pressure found it. And I watched. In the 2 full seconds of silence that followed, something happened to Vanessa's face that I will not forget for the rest of my life. The particular collapse of a person realizing, all at once, in front of every witness she has ever cared about impressing, that the version of herself she has been performing for 3 years has just been shown, publicly, to be a performance. He's, she said, turning to Daniel, her voice climbing now, losing the smoothness it had held moments before. Daniel, will you please just tell your father this is ridiculous? Tell him we've. And then, at 4:06 in the afternoon, in front of her own sister, her own mother, a dozen neighbors, and her 8-year-old son, standing 11 feet away, holding a slice of cake he had not yet taken a single bite of, Vanessa Briggs said the sentence that ended, in one breath, whatever remained of the story she had been telling everyone for 3 years. He's deadweight, Daniel. I've been carrying this whole family for years, and he's deadweight, and you have never once had the spine to say it to his face yourself. Nobody needed Frank's manila envelope after that. She had confirmed in her own voice, in front of 40 witnesses, everything the printed page on the picnic table had only implied. Her sister Steph put a hand over her mouth. Vanessa's mother looked at the ground the exact way Daniel had looked at his hot dog 9 weeks earlier. And Daniel, my son, who had stood silent for 3 years while a story was told over his head about a house he had never actually owned, finally looked directly at me for the first time all afternoon, and I watched something break open in his face that had nothing to do with the deed, and everything to do with the fact that he had just heard, in front of everyone he loved, exactly what his silence had been protecting. Frank stepped in one more time, quiet and final, the way he must have closed hundreds of difficult transactions over 38 years. For what it's worth, he said, nobody here needs to make any decisions today. Walter has no interest in throwing anyone out on the street with no notice. That was never the plan. But going forward, whatever arrangement this family makes about this house needs to be made honestly, with everyone at the table understanding whose name is actually on the paper. That's all this was ever about. I want to tell you about one small thing that happened in the middle of all that, because I think it matters, and because I promised you at the start of this story that I would be fair. In the moment right after she said the word deadweight the second time, before her mother stepped forward, before Steph found her voice, I watched something cross Vanessa's face that I had not seen there in a very long time, not since that first Thanksgiving, maybe, when she'd shown up with a bottle of bourbon she couldn't drink herself, just because she'd wanted to get something right for a man she barely knew. It was there for less than 2 seconds. A flicker of the woman underneath all the calculation, someone who understood, faster than anyone else in that yard, exactly what she had just done and exactly who she had just done it in front of. She did not apologize. People rarely do in the moment a thing like that happens. Not really. Not the kind of apology that means anything. But I saw it, that flicker, and it is the reason I have not spent the months since hating her the way I might have expected to. It is hard to hate someone completely once you've watched them, even for 2 seconds, understand exactly what they've lost. Tyler stood near the trampoline through most of it, still holding that slice of cake, and I remember catching his eye once, briefly, in the middle of everything, and giving him the smallest nod I could manage. Not a triumphant one, just a steady one. The kind you'd give a child to let him know the ground under his feet, whatever it looked like from where he stood, was not actually shaking. He nodded back, uncertain. 8 years old, and trying to make sense of an afternoon no 8-year-old should have to make sense of. And I have thought about that small exchange more than almost anything else from that day. I did not stay for cake. I want to tell you the truth about that, because I think the truth matters more than making myself sound like the hero of an afternoon like that one. I walked back to the suite above the garage at exactly 4:20, closed the door behind me, and I sat down at Linda's kitchen table. And I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel triumphant. I want to say that plainly, because I know what kind of story this sounds like it should be. And I know some part of you watching or reading this has been waiting for the moment where the villain gets what's coming to her, and the wronged man gets to feel, finally, like he's won. I did feel something like relief. The way you feel relief after finally setting down something heavy you've been carrying, so long your arms had gone numb to the weight of it. But underneath that relief, there was something more complicated, something I did not expect and am still, honestly, working through even now. I felt sad for the version of Vanessa I met at that laundromat table 8 years ago, the one who called me Mr. Briggs and brought bourbon she couldn't drink because she'd asked around about what I liked. I do not know exactly when that woman started disappearing under the calculations about square footage and listing prices, or whether she is entirely gone, or whether some circumstance, fear about money, maybe, or a childhood I know almost nothing about, or simply the slow erosion that happens to anyone who spends years being told that value is the only thing that makes a person worth keeping around, pushed her there one small compromise at a time. I do not excuse what she did, but I found, sitting alone in that quiet kitchen at 4:30 in the afternoon, while a party I used to be part of wound down 40 yards away, that I could hold both things at once: the clear-eyed knowledge that she had wronged me badly, and a genuine sorrow that it had come to this for anyone involved, including her. Frank stopped by the suite around 6 that evening, just for a few minutes, still in the same golf shirt he'd worn to the party, carrying 2 coffees he'd picked up on the drive over, even though it was well past coffee hour for most people our age. We didn't talk much. He sat across from me at Linda's table, the same table where I'd read those messages 7 weeks earlier, and after a while he said, "You did that about as clean as it could have been done, Walter. Nobody got humiliated who didn't do it to themselves first." I told him I didn't feel like I'd done anything clean at all, that it felt messy and sad and heavier than I'd expected, and he nodded like that was exactly the answer he'd been expecting, and told me that in 38 years of closing out messes like this one, the ones that felt heavy afterward were always the ones done for the right reasons. The ones that felt light, he said, were usually the ones where somebody had let themselves enjoy it a little too much. I could still hear cars pulling out of the driveway below as he said it, one after another, guests leaving a party that had ended 2 hours earlier than the invitation promised. I did not go down to say goodbye to any of them. Some goodbyes, I have learned, are better left unsaid out loud, and simply lived into over the weeks that follow. Mostly, though, what I felt was tired. 9 weeks of performing normalcy while carrying a folder full of evidence in a drawer beneath my kitchen counter is its own particular kind of exhausting, a weight most people never have to learn how to hold, and setting it down, even in victory, left me wrung out in a way I had not anticipated. I sat at that table until the sun went down and the cicadas started up in the pasture, and I let myself feel all of it, all at once, without trying to sort it into anything tidier than it actually was. I want to tell you what happened to Vanessa, because I think you deserve to know, and because I have tried to say it the way Frank always used to close a deal, plainly, without gloating, the facts laid out flat like a settlement statement. Daniel and Vanessa separated 4 months after that party. I do not know everything that happened in their marriage behind closed doors, and I am not going to pretend I do, but I know that within 2 weeks of the birthday party, Daniel came to me, alone, on a Sunday afternoon, and told me he needed help finding an apartment for himself and Tyler, and that he and Vanessa had agreed Tyler would live primarily with him. I gave him 6 months in the main house, rent-free, to get his footing, which Frank thought was more generous than I strictly needed to be, and which I did anyway, because he is still my son, and because Tyler still needed a stable floor under his feet, while the grown-ups around him figured out what came next. Vanessa moved in with her sister Steph in Alpharetta. She kept her job. The last I heard, secondhand, through Carol Dennison at the mailbox, was that she is doing all right, professionally, which I am glad of, in the complicated way I described earlier. I heard, too, that the listing agreement with Sherry Talbot quietly dissolved within a week of the party, and that Sherry's broker had a conversation with her about verifying ownership before agreeing to represent a property in the future. A small, unglamorous consequence, the kind that doesn't make for a dramatic ending, but tends to be the only kind that actually happens in real life. She has not spoken to me since that afternoon in October, and I have made no effort to change that. Some doors, once a person walks through them the way she did, are not mine to hold open. I think about her more than I expected to, honestly. Not with anger anymore. That faded faster than I thought it would, somewhere around the 6th or 7th week after the party. The way a bruise fades once you stop pressing on it to check if it still hurts. What's left is something closer to a quiet hope that wherever she's landed, she's found a version of worth that doesn't require measuring a person against a listing price. Daniel found a place of his own 8 months ago, a modest 3-bedroom about 15 minutes from me, close enough that Tyler can still catch the same school bus, close enough that I see my grandson most Saturdays. Daniel and I have not talked directly about the 9 weeks between the first party and the second one, the silence at the drink table, the hot dog he studied so carefully while his father was told he had 30 days to disappear. But we talked about it in pieces, the way men like us tend to, mostly in a truck on the way to Home Depot or standing over a grill on a Saturday afternoon. He told me, once, that he'd known for months something wasn't right and had let himself not think about it too hard, because thinking about it too hard would have meant doing something about it, and doing something about it had felt, at the time, harder than anything else in his life. I told him I understood that better than he might think. I have been quiet about hard things myself, more than once, over 64 years. I still live in the suite above the garage. I have not moved back into the main house, even though it is, on every piece of paper that matters, entirely mine to live in however I choose. Daniel is there now with Tyler, and I find I like it that way. My son and my grandson filling those rooms with the kind of noise Linda would have wanted to hear, and me close enough to be part of it without needing to reclaim the whole house for myself just because I finally could. Every Saturday morning, Tyler comes up the outside stairs to the suite at exactly 9 o'clock, still in his pajamas half the time, and we build things together in the small workshop I've set up in the garage below, birdhouses, mostly, and lately a treehouse in the big oak at the edge of the pasture, which is taking longer than either of us expected, because I keep letting him hold the drill even though it slows the whole project down by about triple. He asked me, a few weeks ago, completely unprompted, while we were sanding a piece of plywood together, whether I was ever going to sell the house like his mom used to talk about. I told him no. I told him some things aren't for selling, not because of what they're worth on paper, but because of what they hold. Daniel and I have gotten closer over these past several months than we had been in years, maybe longer than that, if I'm honest with myself. There was a Sunday in February, cold for Georgia, both of us standing in the driveway after he dropped Tyler back off from a weekend with Vanessa, when he finally said the thing I think he'd been carrying since the birthday party. I should have said something a long time before it got to that point, Dad. Not just that day. Years before that day. I told him I appreciated him saying it, and that I wasn't interested in relitigating 3 years of silence over one driveway conversation, but that I was glad to hear it, and that it mattered. We stood there a while longer, neither of us in any hurry to go back inside out of the cold, and eventually he asked if I wanted to come in for coffee, and I did, and we sat at his kitchen table, a different table, in a different house, but the same two men who used to sit across from each other over hot dogs at somebody else's birthday party, and talk for the better part of an hour about nothing important at all, which felt, after everything, like exactly the right kind of conversation to be having. He has since told me, more than once, that he wants Tyler to grow up understanding something Daniel says he didn't fully understand himself until he was 34 years old standing silent in a backyard. That loving someone and protecting them are not always the same action, and that sometimes the second one requires you to risk the comfort of the first. I think that is as close to a thesis as my son has ever spoken out loud, and I think Linda, wherever she is, would have been proud to hear him say it. I still drive the same truck. I still make coffee at 6:15. Some Saturday mornings, I take Tyler to the Home Depot on Riverstone Parkway just to walk the aisles, and he still, at 8 years old, gets genuinely excited every single time we pass the ceiling fan display, pointing at each one like it's a small miracle he's never seen before. It makes me laugh every time, the exact same way, and I have decided I am going to let it keep making me laugh for as long as he keeps doing it. The treehouse got finished in April, 3 months later than I'd originally planned, mostly on account of Tyler's insistence on doing every step himself, even the ones that took him 4 times as long as they would have taken me alone. We painted it the same warm cream Linda chose for the hallway back in 1998, a color Vanessa never got the chance to repaint over. Tyler named it the Eagle's Nest, for reasons he has explained to me at length and that I still do not fully follow, and he sleeps out there some Saturday nights in the summer now, with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie connected to the one I keep on my own nightstand, just in case. Some Saturday nights, lying in the suite above the garage, with that walkie-talkie humming faintly on my nightstand, I think about how strange and good it is that a house nearly lost to a stranger's spreadsheet ended up, instead, holding a boy asleep 40 feet up in an oak tree, exactly where his grandmother would have wanted him to be. Here is the truth this whole story finally taught me, and I want to say it to you plainly, the way Frank said it to me across a table at the Waffle House on a Tuesday morning in September. People who talk about what belongs to them are usually telling you exactly how little they actually understand about what belonging means. Ownership on paper and ownership in someone's head are two completely different documents. Only one of them holds up when the truth finally gets laid out on a picnic table in front of the people who love you. I want to speak to a few of you directly, because I know some of you watching this are not just watching a story. Some of you are living one right now. If you are the parent or grandparent who has been quietly hearing your own house, your own savings, your own years of work spoken about in the future tense by someone who has decided the timeline is already theirs to set, you are not imagining it, and you are not being paranoid, and you are not required to correct the record the moment you notice it. You are allowed to gather what you need, quietly, and to choose your own moment. I have also come to believe something else since that October afternoon, something I did not fully understand until months later. Sitting on my porch watching Tyler and Daniel toss a football in the yard where a birthday party once turned into something else entirely. Generosity and boundaries are not opposites. I gave my son a house to live in because I loved him, and I kept the deed in my own name because, somewhere underneath the love, I understood, even before I had words for it, that a gift given too completely, too quickly, without any structure left standing around it, sometimes gets mistaken by the people around it for something that was never really given at all, just misplaced. Keeping the paperwork in my own name was not a failure to trust my son. It turned out to be the only thing standing between him and losing something none of us could have gotten back. If you are the person still inside the hard part of a story like this one, still hearing the comments, still watching the silence at your own dinner table, still unsure whether what you're noticing is real or whether you're the one being unreasonable, I want you to hear this as plainly as I can say it. You loved correctly. Whatever they did with that love afterward is not a reflection of whether it was worth giving in the first place. Those are two completely different things, and no amount of cruelty aimed in your direction gets to rewrite that fact after the case. If you are the adult child standing silently at a dinner table while your spouse says something about your parent that you know isn't right, and you find yourself studying your own plate instead of speaking up, I am not going to lecture you, because I raised a son who did exactly that, and I understand better than most people how a person gets their one small silence at a time. I will only tell you what I told Daniel, standing over a grill on a Saturday afternoon 8 months after the worst day of both our lives. The cost of your silence does not disappear just because you don't look at it. It goes somewhere. Usually it goes to the person you love, least being able to afford it. If you are the person who carries the family's finances alone, quietly, the one who knows exactly what's in every account while everyone else in the house assumes it simply takes care of itself, I see you, and I want you to know that the invisibility of that work does not make it any less real. Keep your own records. Keep them somewhere separate from the shared ones, not because you expect betrayal, but because clarity is a kindness you owe yourself regardless of how the story ends. And if you are watching this and thinking of your own children, wondering whether you have been generous in a way that quietly cost you your own footing, I want to say this to you as gently as I know how. It is possible to love your children with your whole chest and still keep a folder in a drawer with your own name on the paperwork. Those two things do not cancel each other out. If anything, in my experience, they protect each other. And if you are the person who has spent years being quietly told, in 100 small ways, that your worth is measured in what you cost someone else to keep around, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not deadweight. You were never deadweight. The people who reach for that word are almost always doing the arithmetic of their own fear, not an honest accounting of your value, and you do not owe them the dignity of believing them. Here is one practical thing, and I mean this plainly, not as a scare tactic. If you have ever let someone live in a home you own, or use money you've saved, or lean on land you paid for, based on a verbal promise you meant with your whole heart but never put into writing, go pull your deed. It costs about $4 at most county recorders' offices, and it takes 15 minutes. If what's written there doesn't match what you've been telling yourself, or what someone else has been telling other people, that is worth knowing before it becomes the subject of an argument in front of 40 guests at a birthday party. Knowing the truth of your own paperwork is not an act of suspicion. It is an act of self-respect. And if you've already looked, and everything checks out fine, and this story doesn't apply to your paperwork at all, Pull it anyway sometime this week, just to know for certain. There is a particular kind of peace that comes from holding a piece of paper in your own hands and knowing, without having to ask anyone or trust anyone's memory of a conversation from years ago, exactly what is yours. I did not understand how much that peace was worth until the week I almost lost it. Do not wait for a birthday party in your own backyard to teach you the same lesson. I would also say this gently to anyone who finds themselves on the other side of a promise like the one I made to Daniel all those years ago. Anyone who has been given something generous by a parent or grandparent and has started, quietly, to think of it as fully and permanently theirs. Gratitude has a shelf life if you don't tend to it. It is worth checking, every so often, whether you are still treating a gift like a gift, or whether somewhere along the way it started feeling, in your own head, like something you were simply owed. I will leave you with the same question I have been sitting with since that Tuesday evening in August, when I climbed the stairs to the suite above my own garage and let myself finally feel what had happened that afternoon. Is there a room in your life, a real one, or the kind that exists only in how someone talks about you, where you have quietly been made smaller so someone else could feel bigger? And if there is, how much longer exactly? Do you plan on letting that stand? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Drop a 1 if you believe Walter handled this exactly the way it needed to be handled, calm, patient, and honest, right up until the moment it mattered most. Drop a 2 if you think there's more complexity here, if some part of you feels for Vanessa too, or for how a marriage gets to a place like this one in the first place. And drop a 3 if this story touched something real in your own life, a house, a promise, a silence at a dinner table that you've been carrying longer than you've let on. I'd also love to know where you're watching this from, and what time it is there right now. Someone always watches these videos at 2 in the morning from somewhere I would never expect, and somehow it's exactly the story they needed that night. That means something to me every single time I read it. Last week someone wrote in from a small town outside Perth, Australia, watching at 11 at night their time, saying this story made them finally go pull their own mother's property records the next morning. That is exactly the kind of thing I hope keeps happening. One comment and one quiet Tuesday morning errand at a time. If you've made it this far, and this is the kind of story that speaks to something real in your own life, I hope you'll consider staying with us here. This isn't a channel about entertainment for its own sake. It's a place for people who've carried something heavy and are looking for a little company on the way to setting it down. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Canton, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, locations, or events is entirely coincidental. If anything in this story matched your real life too closely, please reach out to a licensed attorney, your local adult protective services, or a counselor you trust. You are not alone. And remember, sometimes the truth does not arrive with a crash. Sometimes it is just a quiet sound you finally stopped ignoring. Pay attention. Stay kind. Stay awake.